Well, this only highlights the irony of our conference. The World Academy of Art and Science and the Pugwash, which is a conference founded on science with scientists. And when science transforms to technology, it has imperfections. And in the nuclear age, such imperfections. We can't create anything more perfect than we are. And yet we're creating technologies without the constraints of law and morality. We're letting the first horse out of the barn that we created that could end humanity, the nuclear venture. Its problem was highlighted by one of the founders of both the World Academy of Art and Science and Pugwash and the Global Security Institute, where I serve as president, Dr. Joseph Rotblat. And Dr. Rotblat demonstrated in his own being the integration of true spirituality, true faithfulness and ethics, and walked off the Manhattan Project when he saw that the basis of it, which was as a deterrent against the possible Nazi obtaining of the nuclear bomb or the atomic bomb. And he went to the leaders of the Manhattan Project, Mr. Groves, and said, if you do this, this will spread and it will put all humanity at risk. And there's no reason to do it now. And there was no good reason. The horse was out of the barn when the money was allocated. Don't tell me about your values. Show me your budget. And that was part of what drove the project. The money was spent and they had to deliver. And Joseph Rotblat saw the flaw in that and he walked off. He challenged the entire venture. And for that courage and what came from that, the Pugwash conferences ultimately emerged and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. It all began with one person's heart and conscience saying this is not acceptable. And if there's anything that religions can do of great value, it is to awaken the conscience of people. I was deeply moved at the peace conference at the Millennium when in the General Assembly, hundreds of religious leaders gathered to affirm our underlying unifying values. I only remember one phrase that came from that whole conference, and it was really inspiring. And thank God for Ted Turner, a secular person who funded it. The most powerful presentation, in my opinion, was an Inuit Eskimo elder who came and said, we have an oral history of tens of thousands of years where I come from. And we're seeing lakes which shouldn't be there. We're seeing the melting of the polar ice cap. We're seeing rivers of fresh water in massive amounts pouring into the oceans and changing the pH of the oceans. We're seeing the very climate of the planet being changed. Oh, my brothers and sisters from the South, you've developed science and technology that's melting the polar ice cap. When will you develop a technology to melt the human heart? And that is all I remember. And that, for me, is a guidepost. And that particular Eskimo elder, a few years ago, hosted a delegation arising from the United Religions Initiative, one of the multiple interfaith initiatives that is all over the planet. Parliament of the World Religions, United Religions Initiative, Temple of Understanding. And he hosted a delegation that arose from an initiative called the Peace Pledge Project. which is an interfaith initiative that took pilgrimages to holy places. And I had the privilege of going to see the melting of the polar ice cap. And we went from the polar ice cap to Assisi to highlight his call to learn the technology of melting the heart, which obviously St. Francis embodied. And there we issued the following statement. The journey of life is a pilgrimage. Beautiful qualities are a compass. Intending to advance peace and harmony in our personal lives and in the world, we affirm the following. We commit to treat all lives with loving kindness and compassion. We reject the distortions of religious, national, and racial prejudice, which are used to violate the golden rule to treat others as we wish to be treated. We respect the diversity of ways people pursue their individual ideals. We challenge the misuse of beliefs, rites, rituals, practices, philosophies, and traditions used to degrade anyone or which lead to violence. We affirm the necessity of bringing loving kindness and compassion into action. Through such actions, we seek to improve the relationships of people, one nation to another, one religion to another, one belief system to another, one gender to another, one race to another, and one person to another. We call upon all people of goodwill to join this pledge. We pledge that in all we intend, think, and do, we shall strive to bring loving kindness and compassion into action and into the lives of all we meet. So in the same way as FWAAS has adopted the Hippocratic Oath that scientists should do no harm, this was a call to the religious leaders and people of the different faith traditions to pledge to put the qualities of kindness and love and compassion above any differences that can lead to violence and degrading anyone. In other words, the golden rule. Because the golden rule rests on those qualities. The golden rule rests on compassion, on feeling for others as one feels for oneself. I was recently at a conference at Princeton, convened by the James Madison Program for American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton, the largest Muslim organization in the world, Indonesia's Nahdlatul Ulama, the Center for Shared Civilizational Values, and the Global Humanitarian Islam Movement called the R20. And it had a lot of leaders from all of the different faith traditions, and they adopted, as part of their call to action, something that I think we should all promote, which was, it was a long statement of all the values that we're hearing today. Therefore, we urge the United Nations General Assembly to recommend that all UN member states distribute an electronic and/or hard copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in their national languages to all school children through their respective ministries of education. Now, that's a tangible thing that all religions, I think, should be promoting, and I hope the Holy Nuncio will adopt this. I will definitely bring this to him, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights rests on the inherent dignity of everyone. It doesn't say where that comes from, but we know it comes from the great mystery that all religions point to. And it embodies the principle that religious liberty is a fundamental human right. That religious liberty and the liberty of conscience and the rights of assembly, the rights of speech, these rights don't come from the state. These rights come from our inherent humanity, which comes from the Creator. And religions have a duty to highlight that and to advance it. The interesting thing is that we assert the golden rule, but religions are not asserting that our major institutions should abide by it, nor are religions asserting that they themselves must abide by it. I would say out of this gathering, we should call for religions to treat other religions as they want to be treated, and nations should treat other nations as they want to be treated. Because in the same way as there are principles in the world of physics, in the physical world, that can be applied to technology, the human venture has a spiritual dimension that also has rules. And stability is obtained by adherence to those rules. And part of being human is having ethics and morals and values. That's part of what makes us human. When we violate those rules, instability arises. And the golden rule, in its implicit integrating insight, articulates one of those principles. And nothing so offends it as the nuclear weapons venture, in which 9 states say these weapons are good for us, but not good for anyone else. Now, just so you grasp how absurd this is, imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said, no nation can use smallpox or polio as a weapon, but will reserve the right for 9 countries to be able to use the plague as a weapon, and no one else can do it. It just is so patently destabilizing because it violates the principle of equity and the principle of human unity inherent in the Golden Rule. So in the same way as there are laws of physics, there's laws of morality. And we shouldn't allow technologies to be applied without the laws of morality and law controlling them in advance. We let the horse out of the barn with nuclear weapons. We have to find a way of constraining artificial intelligence in that same regard. Fast. And religions have a lot to say about that, because artificial intelligence arises from word processing, which arises from information in the material world. But values come from the luminosity of the soul. They come from inside our core humanity, not from the information of the world. It's like the love that every infant and purity that every infant comes into this world with, that purity that responds immediately to the mother's love, that welcomes it. That doesn't come from the world. It doesn't come from information. It comes from our core humanity. It comes from life itself. And that's why the admonition to see the core of life as love and compassion is the treasure of the world's religions. And that treasure, think of it in worldly terms as a capital resource, has to be expended to save the world. But it's not. It's not. In my country, the capital of religion and in terms of political engagement has been used to elect officials over one issue, the sanctity of life, as applied to the right of abortion. Political capital is used for that, and many politicians are elected on that. But political capital is not being used by the religions to protect the sanctity of the web of life. When it was used by some members of the Catholic faith to push the Chemical Weapons Convention and brought before some of the senators who were holding it up, they changed their votes. That political capital was exercised, and it changed votes. I urge that political capital to protect the living web of life threatened by climate change be exercised. And certainly, when we see the leadership of all the Nobel Peace Laureates, the leaders of the major religions, the Dalai Lama, Pope Francis, and the history of nuclear disarmament advocated by the Holy See, there is tremendous, tremendous energy that could be released to highlight the ethical imperative to get rid of nuclear weapons and the ethical imperative to address protecting the web of life and climate change. And that's very important. And that will not happen without the kind of thing that Pugwash has historically done with scientists, and that the representative, the Holy Nuncio, who just spoke so eloquently of the value of interfaith dialogue. But that interfaith dialogue has to come back to actions. We have to focus on bringing these actions into effect. So one of the ways in which I think we could all work together is the United Religions Initiative. And you'll see when I finish a prayer that we do and the kind of people that are engaged in it. We have started an initiative to make August 6th an International Prayer Day. That on that day, there should be religious gatherings and calls for individuals and our political institutions to take a moment of prayer that nuclear bombs never be used, remembering the use of one relatively small device dropped in Hiroshima on that day, that date in 1945. So, and I hope you can post in the chat the links that I gave you the other night of how people can get in touch with the United Religions Initiative. The United Religions Initiative is the largest grassroots interfaith organization. And this is a call to empower individuals to pray, because we go in the direction of our prayers. Prayers set the compass of our heart correctly. And the prayer is, what's grounded in the prayer is the remembrance of the suffering that the bomb caused, and that we're all, in a sense, beneath it. I think about how president of my country told the American people that when we invaded Iraq, that the people of Baghdad would come out with flowers in celebration. No, that didn't happen. And I think of how when the leader of Russia said that the people of Kiev would welcome the Russian invaders with flowers and celebration. And my wife said, no, that's not going to happen. And I think that any cab driver in Baghdad or cab driver in Kiev could have told the heads of Russia or my country, the United States, no, that's not going to happen. When you invade countries, people don't like it. You wouldn't like it if your country was invaded. And I think that two individuals right now, the heads of Russia and the United States, with over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, could end humanity without any oversight from anybody. And the heads of our countries could have less intelligence on geopolitics than any cab driver in Baghdad or Kiev. That they are frail, relatively ignorant human beings like the rest of us. And they have the responsibility and power of the very fabric of life itself on the planet. There's something out of balance. There's something dramatically out of balance. As George Kennan said, it's a blasphemy, an affront to God of the highest order to be threatening the very future of humanity with these weapons. And I think Pugwash and the World Academy and all the organizations that we represent, and certainly all the religions, have to make a clarion call on this as an issue, because remember, nuclear weapons are a 1930s physics and a 1940s technology. And trust me, DARPA and their counterparts, the cutting edge of military technologies, didn't go into retirement in 1945. there's all kinds of horrible weapons sitting on shelves that will allow fewer people with less resources to do devastating damage and cause enormous suffering. So we need to utilize the power of moral persuasion and the power of prayer to constrain the power of science and technology. That's what's before us today. And human security, as my colleague Gary Jacobs so eloquently stated, is an integrating principle capable of addressing the multiple challenges that we face because we have not brought modernity into compliance with our basic moral and ethical insights of the wise since time immemorial. And human security brings us back to what the brilliant statement of the founders of Pugwash and the World Academy said: remember your humanity, forget the rest. And that rests on what is our humanity? It is compassion. It is love for one another. For without that, our time is wasted. And with that, our time will flourish. So that, to me, is the role of religion. That is the secret sauce that's missing in our meal. That is our duty, and that is within our gift, because that is a duty that arises from the depths of our heart and the prayers that we all have for one another.